Welcome to HardScript.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. Family dinners are supposed to be warm. Laughter, stories, the kind of comfort that makes you feel like you belong. That's what I thought I was walking into when I sat down at her parents' table. The dining room was glowing, plates steaming with food, her relatives smiling as they asked us about work, about the future. For a second, it almost felt real. For a second, I almost forgot the doubts that had been gnawing at me. And then it happened. Her uncle made a casual remark, something lighthearted, calling us a good couple. It wasn't meant to be deep, just dinner table conversation. But she froze, fork in hand, and then she laughed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Don't call us a couple," she said, shaking her head. "That's ridiculous." The room went quiet. Her mother glanced at me, her father cleared his throat, and I just sat there, the words echoing louder than any outburst could have. That was her truth, spoken not in private, but in front of the people closest to her. I didn't ask why. I didn't correct her. I didn't lean across the table demanding answers. I simply let the silence stretch until it suffocated the air around her. She thought she had made a joke, that everyone would laugh and move on. But no one did. They just looked at her, then at me, waiting for my reaction. I smiled once, faint, calm, and I kept eating. That single gesture told her everything she didn't want to know. I wasn't shocked. I wasn't hurt. I was finished. Through the rest of dinner, I played my part quietly. I answered questions, passed plates, made small comments. She tried to recover, to bring me back into her orbit, but every attempt fell flat. The more she talked, the less I responded. And in that silence, the balance shifted. When dessert came, I excused myself. No raised voice, no scene, no final plea for dignity. I pushed back my chair, thanked her parents for the meal, and stood. The sound of my chair scraping the floor was louder than anything she had said that night. She looked at me, eyes wide, suddenly realizing she had gone too far. But I didn't give her the moment she wanted. No argument, no performance. I walked out, steady, leaving her to sit in the wreckage of her own words. That was the end of the circus, and it began the moment she called what we had ridiculous. The night air felt sharp as I stepped outside, the chatter from the dining room muffled behind me. I didn't rush. I walked to my car like it was just another evening, my face calm, my hands steady. But every step was a decision. She had drawn the line in front of her family, and I had no interest in erasing it for her. I heard her heels on the pavement before I reached the car. She called my name, her voice softer now, stripped of the confidence she had carried at the table. She said I was overreacting, that it had just been a joke, that I knew how her family was. She kept talking, every excuse tripping over the next, but I didn't turn. When I unlocked the door, she grabbed my arm. Her eyes were wide, searching, desperate for some sign of anger, even outrage. Anything but silence. I looked at her once, then removed her hand, and sat down in the driver's seat. She stood there, half in the light, half in shadow, still trying to piece together the control she had lost in seconds. The engine started. I could see her mouth moving, but the words no longer mattered. They weren't for me. They were for the empty space she suddenly felt opening between us. I backed out slowly, calm, leaving her on the curb with nothing but her own reflection staring back. That drive home was quieter than any night I could remember. No music, no thoughts spiraling, no desperate questions clawing at me. Just clarity. I replayed her words in my head, not because they hurt, but because they revealed the truth I had been avoiding. To her, I wasn't a partner. I was a placeholder, something she could laugh away when it didn't suit her. At home, I went straight to the bedroom, pulled out a suitcase, and began packing. Not everything, just the essentials. Documents, clothes, the things that belonged to me alone. Each item folded cleanly, each drawer emptied with purpose. I wasn't waiting for another scene. I was preparing for the silence that would follow. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Her name lit up the screen. Then again. I let it ring until it stopped. I didn't read the messages that followed, because I already knew what they said. Apologies, explanations, promises she never meant to keep. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The space beside me was empty, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a beginning. She thought she could define what we were in front of everyone. I had just redefined what we would never be. By morning, her calls had stacked up. Dozens of missed attempts, messages that ranged from apologies to anger. I didn't open a single one. Instead, I brewed coffee, packed the last of my clothes into a second bag, and started pulling old photos off the walls. The house felt different already. Lighter. Around noon, the knock came. Firm at first, then softer, almost pleading. I knew it was her before I even checked the peephole. She stood there with her hair pulled back, no makeup, trying to look fragile. She said she only wanted to talk. She said last night was a mistake, that I misunderstood. I opened the door just enough to step outside, leaving her on the porch. The line had been drawn, and she wasn't crossing it again. She looked at the suitcase by the door, at the bare walls behind me, and her expression shifted. She realized I wasn't bluffing. She started explaining herself, words tumbling over each other, how she felt pressured in front of her family, how it came out wrong, how she didn't mean it. I let her speak. My face gave her nothing. No anger, no sympathy, no relief. Just silence. That silence made her voice crack halfway through, her hands twisting nervously as she tried to fill the void I left between us. When she finally stopped, waiting for my answer, I told her calmly that I was done being the man she could minimize when it suited her. She opened her mouth to argue, but I shook my head once. That was all it took. The fight drained from her before it even began. I picked up the suitcase, locked the door behind me, and walked past her toward my car. She followed, her words breaking into fragments, asking where I was going, asking if this was really the end. I didn't answer. My silence was heavier than any explanation I could have given. As I loaded the bag into the trunk, she stood frozen on the driveway, watching like the ground beneath her had shifted. I got into the car, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. That afternoon, I moved into a small apartment across town. Nothing fancy, just space that was mine alone. No shared closets, no reminders, no weight of someone else's shadow. For the first time in years, every corner of the room answered only to me. She thought showing up at my door would reset the board. What she didn't understand was that the game had ended the moment she called us ridiculous. The first calls didn't come from her. They came from people connected to her, voices I hadn't heard in months suddenly checking in. Her sister reached out, saying she was worried, saying maybe I'd taken things too far. I listened quietly, thanked her for her concern, and said I was fine. No details, no explanations. Just enough to close the door politely. A day later, an old friend called. He said she told him I had overreacted at dinner, that I left her humiliated in front of everyone. He asked if it was true. I didn't argue, didn't defend myself. I only asked him one question. Did she also tell you what she said about us? The pause on the other end of the line told me everything. He hadn't heard that part. When I hung up, I knew the silence would work on him the way it had worked on her. Soon, her mother called too. Her voice was sharp, carrying the weight of a parent trying to protect their child. She said I couldn't just walk away after a small misunderstanding, that relationships were about forgiveness. I let her speak, then calmly repeated her daughter's exact words from that night. Don't call us a couple. That's ridiculous. The line went silent. The conversation ended quickly after that. Each attempt she made to pull people to her side only drew them closer to the truth. Because I wasn't fighting her. I wasn't telling my version louder than hers. I was letting her own words echo back at her through the people she had tried to manipulate. Meanwhile, my new life was taking shape. I furnished the apartment simply, deliberately. No clutter, no reminders. I spent more hours at the gym, more nights out with colleagues, rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of her presence. The more I built, the smaller her shadow became. She, on the other hand, grew more frantic. I heard she had started telling friends that I was cold, that I was punishing her for nothing. But those same friends had already seen the cracks. They had watched her unravel at the dinner table, at the barbecue, in her own words. And the more she tried to control the story, the clearer it became that she had already lost it. It was a Thursday night when she showed up at my apartment. No warning, no call. Just a knock at the door, persistent and heavy. When I opened it, she stood there holding a small bag, her eyes red like she had been crying, her voice soft as she asked if she could come in. I stepped aside, not because I wanted her there, but because I wanted her to see how different the space was now. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal, everything arranged with purpose. There was nothing of her here, no trace of the life she thought she could still step back into. She walked in carefully, looking around, searching for something familiar. She set the bag down and started speaking quickly, her words tumbling over themselves. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't meant what she said at dinner, that it came out wrong, that she felt embarrassed in front of her family and panicked. She tried to paint it as a misunderstanding, a slip of the tongue. I listened. My face gave her nothing. No anger, no relief, no opening. Just silence. That silence unsettled her more than shouting ever could. She tried again, her voice trembling now, asking if we could at least talk, if I could give her a chance to explain. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and set it on the counter. She followed me with her eyes, waiting for something, anything. Instead, I told her calmly that I was no longer interested in words. She froze. For years, words had been her weapon. Excuses, justifications, half-promises. Now they were useless. She reached out, touched my arm lightly, as if the contact could bridge what words couldn't. I moved her hand away without a word. Her face crumbled at that simple gesture. She whispered that she still loved me. I didn't answer. The silence grew unbearable for her. She looked at the bag she had brought, as if it held the key to pulling me back. But the truth was written all around her. This place, this life, no longer included her. I picked up the bag, handed it back, and walked her to the door. She pleaded softly, asking if this was really the end. I opened the door wider. She hesitated, her eyes wet, her breath uneven. Then she stepped out, and I closed the door behind her without another word. For me, it wasn't anger. It wasn't even grief. It was clarity. She had drawn the line that night at her family's table. All I had done was follow it to the end. It was at a friend's birthday gathering when the facade finally cracked. I hadn't planned on seeing her there, but I also didn't avoid it. By then, my life was moving in a different rhythm, and her presence no longer dictated my choices. When I walked into the room, conversations paused just slightly, eyes flicking between us, waiting to see how it would play out. I greeted people calmly, shook hands, offered a few smiles. She was already there, clutching a glass of wine, her laughter forced, her eyes darting toward me every few seconds. She tried to make it look casual, like nothing had changed, but the tension was obvious. For most of the evening, I kept to my own circle, speaking about work, fitness, even travel plans. I didn't mention her once. That silence was louder than if I had shouted. She couldn't take it. Eventually, she drifted closer, inserting herself into conversations, making small comments about how I had been distant lately, how I had pulled away for no reason. Her words hung awkwardly, meant to sting, meant to provoke me. Instead, I smiled politely and kept the discussion on neutral ground. That calmness cut her deeper than confrontation ever could. People noticed the difference. They saw her agitation, her restless movements, while I stood steady, unshaken. At one point, a friend complimented me, saying I looked healthier, more focused. Before I could respond, she snapped. Her voice was sharp, almost bitter, saying I was just pretending, that it was an act. The room fell silent. Every head turned, not toward me, but toward her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I simply set down my drink, offered a polite nod, and walked away. That silence was a mirror, and she saw her reflection in it. When I left later that night, whispers followed me out. Not about me, but about her. They had seen the cracks she couldn't hide anymore. She had tried to expose me, but all she exposed was her own unraveling. Driving home, I realized I hadn't even thought of her words after they left her mouth. They carried no weight. What stayed with me was the clarity of the silence, the undeniable truth that her grip on me was gone, and now everyone else could see it too. She had wanted control. What she found instead was an audience watching her lose it. Not long after that night, her strategy shifted again. She stopped trying to win sympathy in public and started reaching for the last thread she thought connected us. Money, bills, the quiet logistics of a life once shared. She believed those ties would force me to stay engaged. She was wrong. It began with a message about the joint account. She said her card wasn't working, asked if I could check. I didn't answer. Hours later came another, sharper this time, accusing me of forgetting to transfer funds. By the end of the week she called, her voice brittle, demanding to know what had happened. I told her calmly that everything was already separated. She was on her own now. The silence that followed was thicker than any argument. Then came the utilities. She emailed that she couldn't access the account, that she needed the login information. I didn't bother replying. Instead, I made one call, shifted every account into my name, and closed the door she thought she could still push open. A few days later, she showed up in person, papers in hand, her voice sharp. She said I couldn't just erase her from what we built. I didn't raise my tone. I didn't explain. I simply reminded her that she had erased herself the moment she denied what we were in front of her family. I was just following through. Her expression faltered at that, anger colliding with something closer to fear. Meanwhile, my life felt lighter with each cut. I changed the locks, cleared out the last of her belongings, and rearranged the apartment until it was entirely mine. No ghosts, no traces, no waiting for someone else's approval. Friends began to notice the change. They told me I seemed sharper, more focused, even younger. One joked that I looked like I had dropped years in a matter of weeks. And maybe I had, not in age, but in weight. She, on the other hand, was unraveling. I heard from mutual acquaintances that she had borrowed money from her sister, that she complained about how cold I had become. But her words no longer shaped the story. People had already seen the cracks for themselves. What she never expected was that the man she dismissed at the dinner table was the same man who could quietly, methodically, erase her from every corner of his life. And once those ties were gone, she had nothing left to hold on to. It was almost inevitable. When money and obligations failed, she reached for the one thing she believed would always give her power, her body. One evening she appeared at my door, dressed carefully, perfume heavy in the air, her smile trying to hide the cracks underneath. She asked if she could come in, her voice softer than it had been in months. I opened the door, not out of interest, but because I wanted her to see how little it mattered now. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the apartment as if looking for some trace of herself. She found none. The space was stripped clean, deliberate, rebuilt without her. She sat on the couch, crossing her legs slowly, rehearsed like an old performance. She started with small talk, memories of vacations, old stories meant to spark warmth. When I didn't bite, her tone shifted. She leaned closer, touched my arm, her eyes searching mine for the spark she thought she could still control. I didn't move. My face stayed calm, my eyes steady. I stood, walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and returned as if nothing had happened. She laughed nervously, then tried again. She whispered that she missed me, that she wanted us back. She reached for my hand. I set the glass down, removed her hand from mine, and looked at the door. No words were needed. The silence said everything. Her smile cracked. Her eyes flickered with something between rage and desperation. She whispered that she still loved me, but the words carried no weight anymore. They bounced off me like echoes in an empty room. She stood slowly, adjusting her dress, trying to mask her collapse. She walked to the door, glanced back once, as if waiting for me to stop her. I didn't. The door closed softly behind her, and with it, the illusion she still had any power. I sat back down, calm, unmoved. For years, she had controlled the rhythm of our lives with what she gave and what she withheld. Tonight, she finally saw what it looked like when that power was gone. And the silence she left behind was louder than anything she could have said. When she realized her last attempt at seduction had failed, she turned to something smaller, more poisonous: rumors. It started quietly, whispers through mutual friends. She told them I had grown bitter, that I had abandoned her without warning, that I had humiliated her at dinner and walked away for no reason. I didn't respond. I didn't chase her lies with explanations. Because silence does what words cannot. It makes people listen harder. Soon enough, her stories began to clash. One friend told me she said I was seeing someone else. Another said she claimed I was depressed, spiraling out of control. A third mentioned she had painted me as cold and unfeeling. But when those friends saw me, they didn't see a broken man. They saw focus. They saw calm. They saw someone who had shed weight, not someone crushed under it. At a dinner gathering weeks later, she tried again. She sat at the table telling her version of events, her voice heavy with self-pity. She spoke about how she didn't understand why I had walked away, how she had been blindsided. People glanced at me, waiting for my reaction. I gave them nothing. I smiled faintly, asked about work, shifted the conversation to neutral ground. That silence did the work for me. It exposed her without me lifting a finger. Afterward, a friend pulled me aside. He said her story didn't add up. He had heard too many different versions, too many contradictions. He said he had seen the way she looked when she tried to provoke me, and the way I stood unshaken. "You don't look like the villain in her story," he told me. "You look like a man who finally walked away." And that was the moment her plan collapsed. The same people she had leaned on for validation were now doubting her, not me. Her words had unraveled under their own weight. She thought lies could cage me. What she didn't expect was that they would boomerang back, cutting through the image she tried so hard to protect. By the time the night ended, it wasn't me people were questioning anymore. It was her. And all I had to do was remain silent long enough for the truth to reveal itself. The last time I saw her wasn't planned. She showed up outside my apartment on a Sunday evening, the kind of quiet night when the city feels half asleep. She wasn't dressed up this time. No makeup, no performance. Just tired eyes and a voice worn thin. She asked if we could talk. She said she needed closure. I stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind me. She stood there holding a small envelope, her hands shaking as she offered it. Inside was a letter, pages filled with apologies, explanations, confessions of love she claimed never really faded. I didn't read it. I handed it back, untouched. Her voice cracked as she asked if I had ever loved her. She wanted anger. She wanted passion. She wanted proof she still mattered enough to move me. Instead, I gave her what I had been giving all along: silence. That silence crushed her more than hate ever could. Finally, I spoke one sentence. I told her this wasn't about love or hate anymore. It was about respect. And when she stood at that dinner table, laughing at what we were, she erased it. There was nothing left to rebuild. Her shoulders sank. For the first time, she didn't argue. She didn't perform. She simply looked at me, as if realizing that this time there was no door left open, no thread to pull. I turned, unlocked the door, and stepped back inside. She didn't follow. A few seconds later, I heard her footsteps fading down the hall, softer and softer until they were gone. I walked through my apartment, the silence surrounding me not as emptiness but as clarity. I poured a drink, sat down by the window, and watched the city lights flicker. The weight that had once pressed against my chest was gone. She had tried everything: confessions, apologies, seduction, lies, even pity. But what she never understood was that the absence of reaction is stronger than any fight. My silence was not weakness. It was finality. She once said it was ridiculous to call us a couple. That night, she spoke her truth, and I ended it by living mine. Now she carries her words like chains, and I carry nothing at all. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.